Last thing I expected on a Tuesday morning was to become an example, not a cautionary tale, not a lesson in company culture, an actual, literal example, the kind where your new director stands at the front of the conference room, points at you in front of 37 people, and says the words out loud like he's announcing a verdict. I remember the exact moment because I had just set down my coffee, one of those little paper cups from the break room machine, the ones that burn your fingers if you hold them too long. I had just set it down, and then he said my name. "I'm going to be direct," my director said. He always said that before saying something he thought was direct but was actually just cruel. Effective immediately, we're moving on without you. The room didn't make a sound. I've worked in enterprise software for 11 years. Before that, 2 years in IT support. I know what silence sounds like in a room full of people who are glad it's not them. It sounds like nothing. It sounds like everyone remembering how to breathe very quietly. My name is Renata, and I was the lead integration architect for a federal defense contract worth $63 million. My director didn't know that, or maybe he did and thought it wouldn't matter. Either way, he found out. Just not the way he planned. I should explain how I ended up in that room. I'd been at Callaway Systems for 6 years. The company did enterprise software for government agencies, compliance platforms, secure data infrastructure, the kind of work that most people can't talk about at dinner parties, that keeps a lot of important systems running. We had contracts with the Department of Health and Human Services, a few DoD subcontracts, and one contract that I won't describe in detail except to say it went through a procurement channel I'm not allowed to name and required a security clearance that fewer than a dozen people in the company held. I held one. My clearance was tied directly to that contract. Not as a bonus. Not as a footnote. I was the named technical lead on the integration layer. That meant the federal agency on the other side of the contract had approved me specifically, vetted my background specifically, and written my name into the actual contract documentation. Changing that required an amendment. An amendment required approval. Approval took time. Sometimes weeks. Sometimes longer, depending on the contracting officer's backlog. I knew this. The contracting officer on the government side knew this. My previous director, who retired 8 months before all of this happened, knew this. My new director did not know this. His name was Raymond, and he had come to us from a commercial software company in Atlanta that did payroll platforms for mid-sized businesses. He was good at managing timelines and talking to clients about roadmaps. He wore very nice watches and used the phrase, "move fast and fix it later," unironically. He had been in the role for about 4 months when he decided I needed to go. I still don't know exactly why he chose me. Maybe I reminded him of someone. Maybe I asked too many questions in planning meetings. Maybe he wanted to reorganize the integration team, and I was the most senior person in the way. It doesn't really matter, because the reason turned out to be irrelevant compared to what followed. What I do know is that he called me into his office on a Monday afternoon, told me there were alignment issues, and asked me to be available for a brief team meeting the next morning at 9. I didn't think anything of it. We had brief team meetings all the time. The next morning, I brought my paper cup of coffee, sat down at the conference table, and watched 36 of my colleagues file in around me. I remember thinking the room was unusually full. I remember thinking that was strange for a Tuesday. Then Raymond walked in, stood at the front of the room, and fired me. He didn't call it that. He said transitioning out and restructuring and new direction for the team. But he said my name first, and he looked at me while he said it, and he did it in front of all of them. He wanted an audience. He wanted the point to land with weight. I didn't cry. I want to make that clear, not because crying would have been wrong, but because I know that's what people wonder. I looked at him. I looked at the table. I picked up my coffee cup. "Am I allowed to collect my things?" I asked. He said yes. He said HR would be in touch. He said, and this is the part I keep coming back to, he said, "I hope you understand this isn't personal." I said, I understood, I didn't understand, but I was also already thinking about something else. There are things people don't know about federal contracts unless they've worked inside one. The clearance process isn't just a background check, it's a vetting structure that connects to the contract itself. When a person with a named clearance leaves involuntarily without any transition protocol, there are notifications, automatic ones, built into the compliance layer. I had helped build ours. The system would flag the change. The contracting officer on the government side would get a notification. A notification would trigger a review, and the contract had a delivery milestone in 9 days. I knew all of this as I carried a box of my things to the elevator. I didn't say any of it to Raymond. I didn't say anything to anyone. I just walked out of the building, put the box in my car, and drove home. My husband was working from home that day. He came downstairs when he had the door and stood in the kitchen looking at me and the box. "That bad?" he said. "Define bad," I said. He made me a real cup of coffee, not the paper cup kind, and I sat at the kitchen table and thought about what was going to happen next. Here's what I knew. The delivery milestone required a system certification run. The certification run had to be executed under my credentials, because my credentials were the ones named in the security protocol. Not a team login. Not an admin override. My credentials tied to my federal clearance, tied to my verified identity. You can't just hand those to someone else. You can't just substitute a different person and move forward. The system on the government side would not accept a substitution without an amended contract, and an amended contract required lead time that Raymond did not have. I hadn't set it up that way to be difficult. That's just how secure federal integrations work. The protocols exist because the alternative, a system where anyone can step in and claim authorization, is a security gap, and security gaps in defense-adjacent contracts are not theoretical problems. Raymond had fired the only person who could complete the certification run in 9 days. I drank my coffee. I thought about that. Then I texted my husband that I was going to take a walk, and I spent an hour going around the neighborhood just thinking about what to do next. I want to be honest here, I did not feel triumphant. Not yet. What I felt was a kind of strange, very still calm. The kind of calm that comes when you understand a situation completely and realize there's almost nothing you need to do. The situation was going to unfold on its own. What I decided during that walk was to simply be available. I went home. I updated my resume. I sent a message to a former colleague at another firm I'd worked with years back, just touching base. I applied for unemployment, because you should always do that immediately, and people always forget. I made dinner. I watched television. I slept. On day 2, I got a call from HR at Callaway. They wanted to schedule a transition conversation. I said I was available and booked a time 3 days out. On day 3, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. The area code was for the DC metro area, I answered. The person on the other end identified herself as a contracting officer. She told me she was calling about a named integration lead on a federal contract and needed to confirm a few things. She was professional. She was thorough. She asked me to confirm my clearance status, which I did. She asked if I had received formal notice of termination from Callaway Systems, and when I confirmed I had, she was quiet for a moment. "When was that?" she asked. "Tuesday morning," I said. 2 days ago, another pause. "Were you given any transition timeline or handoff period?" "No," I said, "effective immediately." She thanked me. She said someone would be in touch. She ended the call. I sat with the phone in my hand for a minute. Then I went to make lunch. Here's what I found out later from a former colleague who was still inside Callaway and who told me what she saw. On day 4, there was a call. A senior contracting official from the agency reached out directly to Callaway's CFO, not Raymond, not the VP of Delivery, the CFO, to discuss the contract status. The call was not scheduled. The CFO took it in his office with the door closed and came out looking like he'd just learned something he very much wished he hadn't. That afternoon, Raymond was called into a meeting with the CFO and the VP of Delivery. My former colleague said the meeting lasted almost 2 hours. She said when Raymond came out, he looked like a different person. The conversation, as I understand it, covered several things: the 9-day delivery milestone, the certification run that could not proceed, the notification that had been automatically triggered when my clearance was flagged as inactive, and a specific clause in the contract that outlined what happened to Callaway if the certification run was not completed on time. What happened was not small. We're talking about a contract with penalty clauses. We're talking about a federal agency that had approved our company specifically on the basis of the technical lead named in the documentation. We're talking about a situation where we restructured the team is not an explanation that holds up in a compliance review. Raymond had fired me without asking anyone whether firing me was something they were allowed to do. On day 5, my HR contact called me back and said she needed to reschedule our transition conversation. She sounded like she was reading from a script she'd been handed 20 minutes earlier. I said that was fine. On day 6, the CFO called me himself. He didn't open with small talk. He apologized. He used the word error, which I thought was careful of him. He explained that the company was in a difficult position with respect to the federal contract and that they were hoping to discuss options with me. I said I appreciated the call. I said I needed a few days to think. I did not say that I had already been on 2 phone calls with a competing firm and that one of those calls had gone very well. He said he understood and asked me to reach out by the end of the week. I said I would. I called my husband in from the other room and told him what had just happened. He sat down on the couch and didn't say anything for a second. "What are you going to do?" he finally asked. "I'm going to think about what I actually want," I said, "which is something I probably should have done before now." He laughed. "Not a lot. Just enough. Here is what I want to say about the clearance thing, because the comments I've gotten on other stories tell me people want the real detail. A security clearance tied to a federal contract is not like a password. You cannot reset it and reassign it in an afternoon. The vetting process for my level took 16 months the first time and involved interviews with people who talked to my neighbors, my former professors, people I hadn't spoken to in a decade. The clearance belongs to the person. When that person is removed from the contract has a gap, a real one, with compliance implications. I wasn't irreplaceable as a human being, but I was irreplaceable as a named, authorized individual on that specific piece of paper, and replacing me, properly, through the right channels, would take weeks at minimum. Possibly longer, depending on how backed up the contracting office was. The agency was not going to wait, not for a delivery milestone, not for a certification run that was supposed to happen in 9 days. Raymond had treated me like a line item he could delete and replace. The federal government, politely and bureaucratically, had explained that I was not a line item. I did not go back to Callaway. I want to be clear about that, because people always ask. The CFO made an offer. It was generous. It involved a title adjustment and a significant salary increase, and what they called a retention agreement. I sat with it for 2 days, and then I called the competing firm back and accepted their offer instead. The new role was better. Not marginally, substantially. Different project, different team, better pay, and, this mattered to me, a director who had spent 12 years doing exactly the kind of federal integration work I did. Someone who knew what a named clearance meant. Someone who would never have made the mistake Raymond made because he understood the work. I gave the CFO my answer on a Friday afternoon. I thanked him for the offer. I told him I had decided to move in a different direction. He asked if I would reconsider. I said I had thought about it carefully. He went quiet for a moment. "I understand," he said. He paused. "I'm sorry about how this was handled." "I appreciate that," I said. And then we said goodbye. Raymond, from what I heard, was moved off the federal contracts division within the month. He didn't lose his job, at least not immediately, but he was reassigned, which in a company that size is a specific kind of signal. The federal contracts team got a new director, someone who came up through government consulting and had dealt with compliance requirements before, someone who asked questions before making decisions. I wasn't there to see any of it, but I heard about it. My former colleague, the one who told me about the CFO meeting, sent me a message about 6 weeks after I'd started at the new firm. She said the team was doing okay. She said the certification run had eventually been completed after the timeline had been renegotiated with a new named individual who'd had to go through a partial re-vetting process. She said the whole thing had cost the company significantly in delay penalties, in legal review hours, in renegotiation costs. She asked how I was doing. I said I was good. Actually good, not the kind of good you say to end a conversation. There's a thing that happens when someone humiliates you publicly. They're trying to make you feel small. They're trying to establish something about the power dynamic in front of an audience. Raymond did that to me. He stood at the front of a conference room with 37 people in it and said my name and took away my job and wanted everyone to understand that he was the one who could do that. What he didn't understand is that power isn't really about who can take things away from you. It's about what you know, what you've built, what's tied to you specifically in ways that can't just be handed off to the next available person. I didn't walk back into that conference room. I didn't send an email full of carefully worded things I'd regret. I didn't need to. The contract was tied to me. The clearance was mine. The notification went out automatically, the way I'd helped design it to. All I had to do was answer the phone when the contracting officer called. All I had to do was wait. My husband says I'm calm in a way that unnerves people sometimes. I don't mean to be. It's just that I spent 11 years learning systems, how they work, where they break, what happens when you pull the wrong piece out. I've gotten good at seeing the structure underneath things. Raymond saw an org chart. He saw a name on a team that he could remove. I saw a contract with my name in it, a 9-day clock, and a certification run that didn't have a workaround. We were both right about what we saw. Only one of us understood what it meant. I'd been at the new firm for about 8 months now. The work is interesting in the way I forgot work could be interesting. My director asks good questions. My team knows what they're doing. I have a clearance renewal coming up next year, and my contracting officer, a different one now, on the new contract, already knows my name and has already incorporated it correctly into the documentation. The paper cup coffees are behind me. A new office has one of those actual espresso machines in the break room, the kind with the bean grinder and the little tray that catches the grounds. It sounds absurd to mention that, but it's a small thing that means the place is taken care of. Details like that add up. I think about Tuesday morning sometimes. The conference room. The silence. Setting down the paper cup and hearing my name. I think about how still I felt when I left. How I already knew, somewhere underneath the shock of it, that the clock had started ticking. Not for me. For him. I've thought about that Tuesday a lot since it happened. Not in a bitter way, more the way you think about a moment that changed the shape of something. A hinge point. The kind you don't recognize as a hinge until you're already through it. Raymond made a decision that morning based on incomplete information. That's really the whole story, if you strip everything else away. He saw a name on a team list and decided that name was removable. He didn't ask what the name was attached to. He didn't ask what systems depended on it, what documentation had been filed, what compliance structures existed underneath the work I had been doing for 6 years. He just decided. And then he did it publicly because he wanted it to land with weight. What I keep coming back to is that the weight landed, just not where he aimed it. There's something I've come to believe about how consequences actually work, not in any abstract or mystical sense, just practically, mechanically. When you make a decision without understanding the full system you're operating inside, the system doesn't forgive the gap. It just reveals it. Raymond didn't create a problem by firing me. He revealed a problem that had always been there. He didn't understand the work. He'd been managing a federal integration team for 4 months without ever learning what a named clearance actually meant. The firing didn't cause that gap. It just made it visible to the CFO, to the contracting officer, to everyone he mattered. That's the thing about integrity. Not moral integrity, though that matters too, but structural integrity, the kind that comes from actually knowing what you're doing and doing it honestly. When it's real, it holds even after you leave the room. My clearance, my credentials, my name on that contract. None of that disappeared because Raymond said the words. The work I had done was still there. The access protocols I had helped build were still there. The compliance structure was still there. I had done my job carefully and completely, and that didn't go away when he tried to erase me. I think that's what resilience actually looks like when it's not being used as a motivational poster. It's not about bouncing back dramatically or proving someone wrong in a satisfying public way. It's about having built something real, so that when someone tries to dismiss you, there's a gap where you used to be that can't be filled overnight. You don't have to fight for that, you just have to have done the work, the intelligence part, and I mean this in the practical sense of knowing your field, understanding systems, asking the right questions, is what made the rest possible. I knew what my clearance was tied to, I knew what the certification run required, I knew what the timeline looked like. Raymond didn't know any of that, and that ignorance was the actual problem. You can be confident and decisive and still get it catastrophically wrong if you haven't done the work of understanding what you're deciding about. I didn't go back to Callaway. I didn't need to make a point. The point had already been made, not by me, but by the structure of the situation itself. I just answered the phone, told the truth, and waited. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's everything.